When we gather here today, it is not merely to exchange ideas, but to confront the mysteries that move in the hidden chambers of the human soul. The theme before us is one that concerns the destiny of the empath, the soul that feels too much, the heart that has been broken open to sense the invisible tremors of another's suffering. And yet, paradoxically, it is in the abyss of their own darkness that such a soul discovers the most secret gift. A gift concealed within shadow, as if the unconscious itself wished to guard it until the proper time of awakening. The empath is born not from comfort, but from wound. To feel deeply is not an accident of temperament. It is the scar left by an encounter with pain, abandonment, betrayal, or loss. This sensitivity, which so often feels like a burden, is the psyche's way of ensuring survival, like the wild animal that sharpens its senses after being hunted. The empath's nervous system learns to perceive danger, to anticipate moods, to read unspoken words in order to remain safe in a hostile world. Thus, what appears as an innate gift is often the fruit of trauma. But here lies the paradox. What is born as adaptation becomes a doorway into mystery, for in carrying the burden of others, the empath also carries the keys to archetypal knowledge that transcends the personal. Consider the metaphor of darkness in myth, in religion, in dreams. Darkness is the womb and the tomb. It is the place where life begins and where it ends. To enter darkness is to descend into the unconscious, to leave behind the clarity of daylight, reason, and to confront those forces that shape us without our consent. The empath cannot avoid this descent because they feel the sorrows of others as if they were their own. They are inevitably drawn into shadow, into despair, into the labyrinths of psychic suffering. And yet, when they walk through this abyss, something extraordinary occurs. They emerge not only with wounds, but with sight. They learn to discern the symbols that dance within the night of the soul. I recall the dreams of many patients who bore the mark of the empathic wound. In one dream, a woman walked endlessly through a forest at midnight. She was pursued by wolves, their eyes glowing, their howls echoing through the trees. Terrified, she ran until she could run no more, collapsing in exhaustion. But instead of tearing her apart, the wolves circled her quietly, then lay down beside her, their breath synchronizing with hers. In analysis, this dream revealed itself as a truth about the empath's path. What you fear as devouring is in fact your initiation. The darkness does not come to destroy you, but to teach you to live among the primal energies of the unconscious without being annihilated by them. To be an empath, then, is to be initiated into the mysteries of Eros and Thanatos, love and death, compassion and destruction. The darkness is the crucible where the self is stripped bare, where illusions are burned away, where the ego can no longer maintain its fragile defenses. It is there, in that place of surrender, that the secret gift emerges. And what is this gift? It is the birth of the inner eye, the ability to perceive meaning within chaos, to see the archetype shimmering behind the mask of ordinary suffering. The empath becomes not merely one who feels, but one who understands. But let us not romanticize this too quickly. For the road through darkness is long, and many collapse before they find the gift. The empath often confuses their suffering with identity, believing that to be compassionate is to always carry the burdens of others, to be endlessly drained, to be sacrificed like the lamb upon the altar of relationships. This is not the gift, this is the distortion. The true gift emerges only when the empath confronts their own shadow, when they see that their need to rescue, to absorb, to heal, may itself be a way of avoiding their own inner work. In one of my lectures, I once spoke of the archetype of the wounded healer. This figure, found in Chiron of Greek myth and in countless shamanic traditions, is the one who heals precisely because he has been wounded. Yet the danger is clear. The healer who does not tend to his own wound becomes consumed by it, projecting it endlessly onto others, seeking to fix externally what remains unresolved internally. The empath stands upon this razor's edge. They may become enslaved by the wound, or they may transmute it into wisdom. The path through darkness determines which, when you, as an empath, walk through your darkness, you confront the figures that populate your unconscious. The rejected child, the abandoned lover, the tyrant parent, the devouring shadow. These are not merely personal memories, but archetypal dramas staged within the theater of your psyche. They demand recognition, not repression. They insist that you face them, name them, and allow their energies to be integrated. Only then does the alchemy occur. Only then does compassion cease to be a bleeding wound and become instead a radiant strength. Let me speak more plainly. The secret gift is the transformation of sensitivity into discernment. At first, the empath drowns in every tide of feeling, unable to separate their own emotions from those of others. But after the descent, after the struggle in the dark, a new faculty awakens. You begin to know what is yours and what is not. You begin to sense not only the pain of another, but the archetype that underlies it, the mother wound, the father complex, the anima, seeking the animus, the shadow, pressing for recognition. And with this vision, you cease to be consumed by what you feel. Instead, you become a vessel for wisdom, a mirror in which others can finally see the truth of their own unconscious. This is why I say to you, the empath who has walked through darkness is no longer merely a sufferer, but a seer. Their compassion is no longer naive pity, but a form of gnosis, a knowing that pierces through appearances. They understand that every tear shed by another contains within it the salt of an ocean older than humanity, the collective sorrow of the species itself. To feel this is not weakness, it is initiation into the mystery of what it means to be human. And yet, the gift comes with responsibility, for once you can see into the depths of others, You must resist the temptation to control, to manipulate, to assume the role of savior. The true empath does not enslave with their insight, nor do they exploit the vulnerability they perceive. Instead, they hold space with reverence, knowing that each soul must walk its own path through the labyrinth. The darkness you endured taught you humility, taught you that no one can be rescued without their consent, taught you that love is not possession but presence. The symbol of the phoenix comes to mind here, burned to ashes. It rises again with wings of fire. So too does the empath, who, having been consumed by their own darkness, rises with a new radiance. The ashes of despair become the soil of wisdom. The very pain that once seemed meaningless becomes a source of meaning itself. In Jungian terms, this is individuation, the process by which the self integrates shadow and light, suffering and joy, instinct and spirit into a wholeness that transcends the opposites. Let us imagine then that your darkness was not punishment but initiation. Every betrayal, every abandonment, every tear was a step down into the underworld, where Persephone waits, where Orpheus sings, where the soul confronts death in order to be reborn. The empath's secret gift is not avoidance of suffering, but the realization that suffering can be transfigured. And once you know this, you become a bearer of hope in a hopeless world, a living testament that the psyche is not destroyed by darkness, but expanded through it. I say to you now, do not fear your sensitivity. Do not despise the nights when you thought you would not survive. Do not curse the moments when you felt like a stranger in a world too loud, too cruel, too indifferent. For it was in those moments that the unconscious was shaping you, pressing you, carving into you the vessel that would one day hold the gift. You are that vessel now. You are the one who carries light, not because you avoided the dark, but because you entered it fully and returned. And so, when I speak of the empath's secret gift, I am not pointing to a charm or a trinket, but to the awakening of the soul's eye. To see means to endure. To see means to suffer, but also to emerge from suffering with a vision that others cannot possess. It is not clairvoyance in the vulgar sense, not a fortune, teller spectacle, but an interior knowledge of the soul's structures, of the archetypes moving behind every human gesture. When you have walked through darkness, you know the sound of its footsteps. You can recognize when another is being pursued by their wolves, because you remember the heat of their breath upon your own skin. It is important to linger on the question of projection here, for the empath is especially vulnerable to it. Projection is the mind's ancient defense, the tendency to see in others what it cannot yet face within itself. The empath, before their initiation, may believe they are reading others clearly, when in fact they are drowning in their own shadow, reflected outward. They may say, "I feel your sorrow," but what they are truly sensing is their own unresolved grief mirrored in the faces they encounter. Walking through darkness strips away this illusion When you confront your own shadow, you begin to separate what belongs to you from what belongs to another. That discernment is the threshold of the gift. Consider the archetype of the descent, Inanna, going down into the underworld, Orpheus seeking Eurydice, Christ entering the tomb, the shaman falling ill before receiving healing powers. In every case, the descent is unavoidable, and in every case, the one who returns brings back something more than survival. They return with knowledge, with medicine, with authority. The empath, too, must pass through this archetypal pattern. Their gift is not handed to them by gentle hands. It is forged in the fire of the underworld, and once they have walked through, they carry within them a map, a secret geography of the soul, which allows them to guide others who wander in confusion. But you must understand that this gift is double-edged. To see another's unconscious is a dangerous power if it is not tempered by humility. It becomes manipulation. If it is not anchored in love, it becomes control. The empath who has not yet walked through darkness will use their sight to bind others, to make them dependent, to inflate their own importance. But the empath who has endured the descent knows that every soul has its own timing, its own rhythm, its own necessity. They do not rush to rescue, for they have learned that no one can be saved against their will. Instead, they hold presence like a silent flame, illuminating without forcing, witnessing without devouring in dreams. This transformation often appears as a shift of imagery. At first, the dreamer is overwhelmed by floods, by endless waters, by drowning. Later, after the descent, the waters remain, but they are navigable. The dreamer finds themselves in a boat, or discovers they can breathe beneath the waves, or encounters a guide who teaches them to swim. The unconscious has not disappeared, but the relationship to it has changed. This is precisely what happens in the empath journey. The tides of others' emotions no longer drown them. Instead, they learn to sail upon them, to move with their currents without losing themselves. Here we encounter the symbol of the alchemical vessel. The alchemist spoke of the vase, the container in which transformation occurs. Without the vessel, the volatile substances would evaporate and no transmutation would be possible. The empath, after walking through darkness, becomes such a vessel. They can contain pain without collapsing, can endure intensity without fleeing, can hold the paradox of love and rage, of beauty and horror, without needing premature resolution. In this containment, others find healing, not because the empath solves their problems, but because the empath's presence communicates that wholeness is possible, that suffering does not mean annihilation. I tell you now, the secret gift is not immunity from suffering, it is intimacy with it. The empath learns to sit beside despair without needing to banish it, to listen to rage without becoming it, to cradle grief without drowning in it. This is the birth of the inner healer, not the rescuer who rushes to extinguish pain. But the wise one who knows that pain has its own intelligence, its own role in the unfolding of the soul, the empath becomes a midwife to transformation, a witness to the labor of the unconscious as it struggles to bring forth new life. The world needs such souls, for in an age of noise, the empath listens. In an age of haste, the empath waits. In an age of numbness, the empath feels. But to embody these qualities without collapsing requires the very initiation. We are speaking of the long, often terrifying journey through one's own shadow. Those who resist this journey remain half-formed, bleeding out their energy in endless cycles of codependency, mistaking martyrdom for compassion. Those who accept it become radiant, carrying within them the gravitas of one who has looked into the abyss and lived to speak of it. Imagine, if you will, the moment after a great storm. The trees are broken, the ground is flooded, the air smells of destruction, and yet there is a silence that follows, a clarity of sky, a freshness that carries the promise of renewal. The empath's life after the descent is like this. They know storms will come again, but they no longer fear them. They have survived, and in surviving, they have discovered within themselves a strength that is not merely personal, but archetypal. They become living testimonies to the psyche's capacity for regeneration. And so, I invite you to consider your own darkness, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Every night of despair, every trembling under the weight of too much feeling, every collapse under the burdens you could not name, these were not wasted moments. They were the forge, they were the descent, they were the necessary initiation into the secret gift. If you are still walking there, know this: the wolves that pursue you may yet lie down beside you. The flood that drowns you may yet become the sea upon which you sail. The fire that consumes you may yet become the light that guides your path. Do not fear the darkness, for it is not only a place of endings, but a womb of beginnings. Do not despise your sensitivity, for it is not weakness, but the raw material of wisdom. And do not believe the lie that your empathy is merely a curse, for once you have walked through your own underworld, you will know that it is also your crown, your secret gift, your initiation into the mystery of being fully alive. And yet, my friends, there is something even deeper we must touch, something that lies beyond the simple idea of gift, something that belongs to the very mystery of individuation itself. For what the empath gains after walking through darkness is not merely strength, nor is it simply compassion refined by suffering. It is a transformation of identity, an awakening to a dimension of the psyche that transcends personal biography. The empath who has endured the underworld discovers that they are no longer only themselves, they are also the vessel through which the collective speaks, the mirror in which the archetypes reveal their faces. This is why the world so often misunderstands the empath. To those who live only upon the surface of life, the empath appears fragile, oversensitive, unstable, But what is overlooked is that this very fragility is the thin membrane through which the collective unconscious presses. You are porous, not by accident, but by vocation. You are the threshold through which the ancient gods of the psyche continue to breathe. And when you have walked through darkness, you realize that your task is not to deny this porosity, but to make of it a sacred art, a conscious practice, a disciplined openness, rather than an unconscious bleeding. Let us take an example. A young man once came to me overwhelmed by the despair of others. He said he could not walk into a room without feeling crushed by invisible weights, as if the walls themselves carried grief. He thought himself cursed. He thought himself broken. But in the course of his inner work, he dreamt of a cavern where countless voices echoed, crying out for release. In the dream, he was terrified. But slowly, he began to hum, then to sing. The voice quieted, and one by one, they dissolved into light. What he discovered was that he was not merely absorbing pain, but transforming it through presence. His darkness had taught him to survive. But the gift lay in transmutation. This is the alchemical secret. Nigredo, the blackening, comes first. The long descent, the confusion, the despair. Then, if the process continues, albedo follows the whitening, the illumination, the clarity that emerges after the confrontation. The empath who has endured becomes an alchemist of feeling, able to endure nigredo without panic, able to wait for albedo with patience, knowing that the psyche itself seeks integration. They do not force transformation, but they trust its rhythm. This trust is itself the gift, for it allows them to walk with others through storms without the arrogance of premature answers. You may wonder why this path must be so severe. Why does the gift require such darkness? The answer lies in the very structure of the unconscious. The unconscious does not reveal its treasures cheaply. It guards them behind trials, behind terror, behind the disintegration of the ego. Only when the ego has been humbled, broken open, can the archetypal patterns show themselves without distortion. The empath's suffering is not random. It is the crucible through which the ego is shattered enough to perceive reality more deeply. In this sense, every wound you carried was a doorway. Every heartbreak, a preparation. Every collapse, an initiation. I remind you, however, that individuation is not an escape from humanity into some abstract state. It is a fuller humanity, a deeper rootedness in flesh and time and suffering. The empath who has gained the gift does not float above life in sterile detachment. They are more human than ever, capable of tears, capable of rage, capable of joy, but all of these transfigured by a deeper meaning. They see their emotions not as random waves, but as currents in a vast ocean, moving in patterns that link them to the whole of humanity. At this point, I must speak of the shadow once more, for no discussion of empathy is complete. Without it, the shadow is not only what we repress, but what we unconsciously project. For the empath, the shadow often takes the form of hidden resentment. You give endlessly, you feel endlessly, you suffer endlessly, and yet beneath the surface there grows a bitterness that no one sees. This bitterness is the cry of your own neglected self. If it is not faced, it poisons the gift, twisting empathy into manipulation, turning compassion into control. Walking through darkness forces you to face this bitterness, to confess to yourself that you are not only a saint, that you are also wounded, angry, selfish, human, and in that confession lies liberation. For when you embrace the shadow, your empathy ceases to be a mask of virtue and becomes instead the transparent radiance of authenticity. There is a passage in the Gospel of John where Christ says, "Unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." This is a universal archetype. The empath's old self, built upon survival and wound, must die in the soil of darkness. Only then can the deeper gift germinate and bear fruit. The death is painful. It feels like annihilation. But in truth, it is transformation. The empath is reborn not as a victim of sensitivity, but as a steward of it, not as a slave to emotion, but as an interpreter of it. When you emerge from the underworld, you carry with you a strange serenity. You know pain will come again, but you do not fear it. You know sorrow will visit, but you do not despise it. You recognize that life itself is woven of opposites, joy and grief, love and loss, creation and destruction. To resist this is to remain in bondage. To embrace it